Hello and welcome to this special. My guest today is Mr. Amit Tandon, co-founder at IIAS, the institutional advisory body. Amit, thank you for joining us in Bloomberg Quint.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We are trying to look at the kind of board membership, women on Indian corporate boards, and your survey has spoken about that 13% of all board members are women today, as compared to 5% 5 years back. Can you take us through what are the salient points that this report brings in, and it also removes the myth that most of the board members are promoter family owned women directors?
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me take a step back and tell you why we did this survey. We worked with two entities. One is Women on Corporate Boards Mentorship Program, and the other is Prime Database. Now, the objective behind the study was that oftentimes you have regulations, and then what the impact is, and is it effective or not, or what the efficacy of regulations has been, is really not clear. So the objective this time was to actually look at the progress with regard to women on corporate boards. You'll recall that when the Companies Act got legislated in 2014, they had said that you need one woman director, at least one woman director on all corporate boards. So we said, look, it's been now about 3 years, 3.5 years, so it's a good time to take stock about what has happened. Coming to the question which you've asked, well, the progress has been, there has been some progress which has been made. Till such time as the regulations changed, you had about 4 to 5% of positions on the board were held by women. Immediately after that, the number actually jumped up to 11, and now it's sitting at 13%. It's a far cry from where we would all like to see the number, but nonetheless, you can't deny that regulations have had some impact, and there is a change in the number you see.
I remember very clearly that when this regulations came in first, the first question which everyone asked was, do we have enough women participants or directors available in the market so that we can put, and I think SEBI also gave some time for companies to bring women directors on board. April 1st 2015 was one of the deadline which SEBI said. What is the scenario today?
Look, we had the seminar yesterday, and clearly what they said was, initially there was an issue with regard to the supply side, that are there enough women who qualify to come on the board. I kind of take that with a pinch of salt, because there are at the end of the day, you have so many professional women all around, and there are enough. But I guess the issue is that, look, are there in your field of vision? So when you look at the composition of the remuneration committee, which makes the selection,
Yes.
It was dominated or continues to be dominated by men, and therefore when they think about people they know who they want to work with, the most obvious choice is bring in another man. So one of the things which was done by Women on Corporate Boards Mentorship Program, who's kind of worked with us on this survey, was the fact that they said, okay, let's kind of identify some women, put them through a rigorous training program, and then get them to join the corporate boards. So what they actually did was, again, while everyone knows that they are women, what they did was actually brought them to the edge of the boardroom, and said that, look, these are the women from whom you can.
They created a talent pool.
They created, well, the talent pool was already
but
there.
Just
they
visible, more visible.
That's right. They brought greater visibility to that talent pool and said that, look, you are there and you can now be available. This set of women are those who are quite, should be on the boards, and therefore companies should actually bring them on the boards. The second issue which you raise is that, and that is a little bit on the earlier question which you asked, which is the fact that, initially a lot of people said, look, what's the easiest thing for me to do? I've got,
Get a family member?
I've got, yeah, absolutely. I can bring in my wife, or I've got 2 sons and a daughter. My sons are on the board. Why not bring in my daughter? So you saw some of that, and that gave rise to this myth that it's kind of dominated by family members. But when we looked at the data, that's not actually true. About 60%, more than 60% of the women are independent directors, and then if you kind of look at the breakup of the women itself, you find that about 16% are what you call not independent,
Yes.
of which 8% are professionals, and therefore they have every right to be on the board, and it's just 8% who are in the other category. So it's a fairly small number, and I'm glad we've done this survey, if nothing else, to break that myth, because we speak to a lot of investors all the time, and a lot of the global investors say, oh well, you've got this legislation, but boards
How
are being,
effective it is.
yeah, absolutely, how effective is it, and we are really not sure whether it's serving the purpose, because corporates are bringing in their family members. So this clearly establishes
to
that's
tell
not
me,
the
Amit,
case.
we are getting a new age women leaders into the boardrooms. Is the average age of the person coming into the board is also lower than the average of the average age of the board?
Oh, absolutely. One of the things is we looked at the average age. I think for men it averages about 64, and the average age of the woman director is 56. So given the fact that the 13%, it's not going to significantly move the needle.
Yeah.
But again, it comes out of the fact that a lot of the male members have been entrenched directors for a period of time. I think a lot of them, if
Yeah.
not
The average
most
tenure of
them.
the board.
Average tenure is also
much higher.
is closer to 10% versus women who
Yeah.
are there at a little under 5%.
Yeah.
So it's kind of having a positive impact on some of the board aggregate and statistics which we see today.
Some of the interesting aspects which I found was some of the sectors like consumer, where you have 101 women directors, financial services 92. But what is surprising was IT, which has a lot of women workforce, has only 33 women directors in it. Now if you take a percentage of it, maybe higher, it may be 1 point more than one director, but number of directors coming out from the IT services, which was very surprising, because a bulk of the women workforce we see either are employed in IT or financial services, right?
Yeah. Look, the way to look at it is somewhat different, which is the fact that when you look at the input or the people who are now joining the jobs, you'll find there's a 50% mix between men and women.
Yeah.
But what happens is that over a period of time, women keep dropping off, whether it is because they have families, children, other commitments. So the question is, how many of them are just outside the corner office? And there, if you look at it, and you'd find that there are far fewer women who are outside the corner office. Now, IT sector is a great example, because just because of your travel needs, you'll find that a lot of women find it difficult to cope with the kind of stress and being away from the family it entails. Now, I think it's something where a lot of men are okay with it. Women kind of, when they have to choose, most of them rightly choose the fact that it's really closer to home is much better. And therefore, that's what you end up with. So the pool from which you look, assuming that you're kind of looking at this sector itself. But having said so, if you kind of look at it in the aggregate, you'll find that there's no specific skill that you would say that women are more suited to bring in. They have a level, this particular skill, and therefore they're more suited, or men have this particular skill and therefore they're a lot more suited. I don't think that is there, and that's the interesting point, that it's kind of if you look at broadly the mix of companies and their so-called number of companies, it kind of fits in pretty well with the pattern, fits in well. Of course, there will be some kind of small aberrations here and there, but there's nothing intrinsic why that should be so.
While women are getting representation on various committees on the board, do you think that the Indian board or the corporate board thinks that women on board are suited for more softer skills like CSR? We saw a lot of women directors taking care of the CSR part of it, but not on finance, audit, or NRC, those serious kind of stuff. Is corporate India still divided whether serious business and hardcore board businesses should be given to women directors?
Look, if you look at the data, you've got slightly more women as far as CSR is concerned, but again, I think it's one of the myths which is there. There was a very interesting observation which was, or comment which was made at the discussion, panel discussion yesterday at the time of the release of the book, and that was that look, once someone enters the boardroom, they leave their gender behind. Once you're inside, you're not a man or a woman, you're just someone who is on the board of the company, who has a fiduciary responsibility towards the shareholders of the company and are supposed to do the best. So therefore it depends on what are the skills when you're looking at the composition of the board. Unfortunately we don't see it happen very often here, but it's always good for the board to kind of give a table and say that look, what are the different skill sets which the various members are bringing to the table. So some could have skill sets, as you say, some of the harder aspects, some could be some of the softer aspects, and I again don't think gender has much a role to play, though there is some perception around it, and that might guide people to expect it to be so.
But that kind of maturity of the Indian board hasn't come in, right? I mean, you still see,
Sure. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So there are some of these myths which are there, which and there are these, if not myths, I'd say stereotypes. And there are these stereotypes which people do believe that look, this is what will happen, this is what is to be expected. But I think slowly but surely we are kind of breaking away at these shibboleths, and we will have. I think that if we were to have this discussion 5, 7, 8 years down the line, we would be asking, you would be asking me a different set of questions rather than what you're asking.
The ratio also changes. You're targeting 20% by 2020, and I hope more women are part of the Indian boards. But one of the data points which you threw up was 15 companies of the Nifty 500 don't have women directors, and a large portion of that 11 are from public sector enterprises. Has the regulator and exchanges failed in ensuring that they enforce this law for public sector undertakings?
Look, if you look across a number of things, none of the exchanges have had, the two exchanges have not had any success with regard to PSUs and getting them to adhere to any guidelines.
Why is that?
As far as, the PSUs believe they are answerable to Parliament and not to, and as a consequence of that to the ministry rather than to the stock exchanges. But having said so, if you look at women directors, I don't think the PSUs are singling out women directors. Their track record as far as male directors is concerned is equally weak or equally bad. Then you're looking at about four companies out of the 500. It should not happen because companies need to plan ahead. One of the other recommendations, since you mentioned that 20% by 2020 is that have at least one woman director, at least one independent woman director on your board. So if companies had that, they would not have, at least even those 4 companies would not be there.
But why hasn't exchanges succeeded in getting women directors on board? They have the LODR guidelines very clearly says that they can penalize, fine companies for violation of these guidelines.
I think it's interesting because when this guideline was first mooted, I think SEBI had said and the stock exchanges had kind of then imposed a fine, and it was a kind of fine which ratcheted up. So it said 1,000 for one day, and then from the second week onwards it was 2,000, and therefore the consequences, financial consequences for companies could be relatively large. But my understanding is that at some stage this it was removed. It was completely removed, and now even if the stock exchanges want to penalize companies, they're not sure what they can do. So we would ask the regulators to put some of this back, but more important, while you don't want women on the board because companies are ticking the box. You want them because as Mao had said, women hold up half the sky, and therefore if they are 50% of the workforce, there is no reason to say that they should not be 50% of boards.
Amit, thank you very much for joining us today.